This week's episode is brought to you by Campaign Refinery, an amazing new email marketing automation tool. Look, in the world of digital marketing, there's a lot to keep track of. We all know this. As much as we're in love with social media and the power of social conversation here at Social Inc. and on the All About Digital Marketing podcast, we are well aware at just how powerful email marketing can be. Email marketing is not dead. In fact, it's never been more important to help you leverage your presence everywhere else into the one channel that you'll own, regardless of what changes Facebook, Twitter, or any other platform makes in the future. I've known the founder, Travis Ketchum, for years, and he's been a past guest on the podcast, episode 15 if you want to listen to it. I've personally used his other products before, and they've been fantastic. The amount of thought that he's put into each and every one of what he's created has been incredible. I'd highly encourage you to try their free 14-day trial at campaignrefinery.com to see what world-class email marketing automation can do for you and your business. Massive thank you to Travis and Campaign Refinery for their support of the All About Digital Marketing show. Welcome to the All About Digital Marketing podcast. The show all about
digital marketing.
Digital marketing.
Digital marketing.
Digital marketing.
Brought to you by Social Inc., a digital marketing agency specializing in social media and content marketing for brave brands and forward-thinking SMEs. I'm your host, Chris Bruno, and as always, we're here to bring you the most actionable tips, tricks, tools, and insights to help you achieve more when it comes to your digital marketing. Subscribe to the show and be sure to share with a friend if you found something useful or interesting. You can find all the show notes and more information on www.allaboutdigitalmarketing.co.uk. Tony, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. Pleasure being here.
So Tony, I know you as the founder of Results Trained, but for anybody out there who hasn't heard of you yet, what exactly do you do and how exactly did you end up here?
Yeah, it's a great question. So my mission and our mission at Results Train is to democratize marketing. And so to help the small and medium-sized businesses leverage the same strategies, tactics, and tools that the very best companies have worked with. And that kind of where that started was from my own story. And so I started off in small business. So my parents had a small Italian bakery, and they were wonderful bakers. Unfortunately, not the best business people. And so when I was 12, we lost everything. And I ended up being homeless. And the three of us had to live in my oldest sister's basement. And so looking back, I later tried to redeem that. And so I went to college. I went to study entrepreneurship at a university and did really well with that. And then launched a second business with my parents, also in the bakery field. This time it was a little bit better. So we had cakes and we were able to mail these cakes. We came up with the technology to mail the cakes across the country and do it with a photo on top. And so they were pretty popular. We were able to do cakes for Jennifer Lopez, for Jay-Z, for some major corporations like IBM, Microsoft, etc. And we had great PR, great SEO. We were literally on the top of Google for terms like corporate gifts and birthday cakes. But then that business came crashing down as well. I didn't understand profitability and a lot of the things that are so core to running a business. And so that went out of business, and I found myself, unfortunately, homeless again. And it was a little bit worse for me personally this time because I was a little bit older and I had a baby on the way and I was newly married. And so I said to myself, I got to find out how to actually make this work. And so I said, who actually knows how to run a business? Clearly, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't learn everything I needed to from going to a university. So I started a mission to work with the very best companies in the world. So I was fortunate to get hired at a great agency, grew that agency, and ended up working with literally some of the best companies in the world, like Ford Motor Company, General Motors, ADP, some major healthcare companies. And so I took that and then I started this training company where I started the conversation called Results Trained to help businesses learn what I was missing.
It's always an interesting one, actually, and if you don't mind getting into this, because the university route or college in the US is something that's kind of a hotly debated topic, right? For us here
Yeah.
in Europe, we're seeing more and more countries where people are coming out of uni with a degree in something and then unable to find a job. And actually, the people that do come out of uni are probably actually, retraining or relearning the basics to be able to actually do the jobs that they thought they were going to be able to swan into. What was the experience and what was the kind of gap between the university education that you got and the knowledge that you really actually wanted and needed?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think a lot of it comes down to application. So it's great to have knowledge, but the application is really what differentiates people, and also your aptitude and how you approach things. So I've hired literally hundreds of people, and what I look for are people that are adaptable, that can learn, especially in this area in marketing, in digital marketing. Change is constant, and so relying on a university where you're learning, some fundamental things, but a lot of it changes over time, especially in this area. So I much rather hire someone that has a good, not necessarily on the skill set, but a good attitude in how they react to things and because skill sets can always be taught, but how you approach things and your mindset cannot be necessarily, in the same way. So that's kind of what I think makes the difference between someone just getting a college or university education and someone that's actually been in the field doing it.
I think that's a really good, interesting sort of segue there. But the idea of boots on the ground, the real life experience of doing as opposed to learning is hugely valuable to so many people, right? But from your point of view, more than anything else, I mean, so you obviously those stories that you told me, I didn't know about those beforehand. So those hit me quite hard, actually. But in that second attempt at the business, right, you guys are building up everything. Everything's going really well. What were the kind of pitfalls, or was it just a shift? Was it change in market, or was it competition? Is there something that you've looked back over these sort of things and sort of realized there were things in particular that really helped or really influenced that process?
Yes, absolutely. And this kind of goes back to the book I'm launching called Small Steps to Grow Profits. What I call it, why I use the word profits specifically, is because that, oddly enough, is what a lot of businesses do not focus on. And so you have to have enough profit margin to be sustainable. And kind of the current situation we're going through now is a case in point. So most businesses don't have more than a few weeks, honestly, of cash reserves in the bank. And a lot of that comes down to two things. One, the profitability of the company. So making enough money, enough margin off of each client, customer, patient, et cetera. And then secondly, cash flow. So when that money comes in and out. And so one of the things I didn't know back then that I've learned, I'm still learning, honestly. I still make mistakes even today, but not having a real firm handle on the cost of the cakes, especially how much it costs to mail the cakes. So UPS and FedEx and all the shipping carriers increased their pricing, and we just didn't have enough room to justify the cost per acquisition of getting the customers. And so just the business model basically fell apart because there wasn't enough of a margin there.
It's one hell of an experience. And I think that you've just mentioned as well your new book that's coming out. So let's dig into this, because I think small steps towards anything have huge results, right? And
yes.
The idea of small steps to a growing profits, and something that I will double back on afterwards, but in terms of profits and cash flow and things like that. But the small steps to grow profits. So tell us a little bit about your book and how you've kind of come together with these ideas and these steps that you've seen from other brands.
Yeah. So growing up, I mean, my mother was always an inspiration. And that was where the name Small Steps came from. So kind of much like today, in the late 30s through the 40s, 50s, there was another pandemic. It was polio. And so my mother had contracted that when she was a baby. And she literally could not walk until she was 14. So she had to learn step by step how to do it. And one of the things I learned from her was to break things down, to take things down like an insurmountable challenge or anything that's really hard right now. What you have to do is break it down to those small steps and then make incremental improvements. And I found that same idea carries through with the very best companies. So what they do is they grow and they focus on what I found is 6 factors. They focus on incremental change across these six factors. And when they're done in conjunction, you actually have compound growth. So you can grow at a much, much faster rate. And so that's kind of what the book is about. And I distill that into three main groupings, which I call the results flywheel. Number one, how to growth compound, which means knowing what to do. Like, what is your strategy? You have to have a strategy for growth, like all the components of what's going to drive your actual growth. Then how to do it. So now that you have the strategy, what exactly you're going to do. And that comes down to two things. One, your planning, and then two, the execution. So making sure that you actually follow the plan and adapt if you're off track, and then keep yourself accountable to it. And then number three, leveraging resources. And I say leveraging because a lot of people have the mindset, especially small businesses, that I don't have enough resources, I can't compete. But what I found, it's really comes down to how you're leveraging your resources that makes all the difference in the world. So not wasting your time, making the most out of every dollar you have, and kind of maximizing your effort.
I think that's really interesting on a couple of things. So we talk to a lot of small businesses. We work with WeWork Labs here in the UK and try to help startups within their accelerator programs. One of the main fundamentals I always come back to is, what's the plan, right? What's your strategy? What's the objectives? And I'm amazed to see how many businesses, even ones that are going through like accelerator programs or stuff like that, that actually don't really have a plan or don't really have a strategy in place. And it's something that, one, it frustrates me because clearly when we come in and we want to try and help people with anything from social media marketing to ads to campaigns, whatever it might be. But one of our biggest sort of struggles is we've spoken to companies, small and big, it happens across the board, that are actually spending money, valuable resources, like you talked about, things that, you don't really have a huge amount. They're spending this money and they're working with an agency or a freelancer, and they're posting to social media, they're writing blogs, they're doing content. And when I ask the simple question of, how's it going? And they go, well, what do you mean? And I'm like, well, how many results are you getting compared to what you had planned or you were hoping for? And literally we've had conversations where it goes quiet. that the penny kind of drops at that point, going, we didn't realize you should have a target, or we're trying to get some sort of results out of this. And it's kind of this mentality of we have to do things because we feel we have to, i.e. social media, we have to be on social media, but actually not building that strategy. So I guess the question from your point of view, that important first step, that strategy, how do you help especially small to mid-sized businesses to really build out who they are and what it is that they're trying to do?
Yeah. So what I created to help my clients and the people I consult is a framework, which is, again, that's discussed in the book, but I call it the results loop. And so we look at the 6 fundamental factors that drive growth. And the first factor looks at the markets. So before you start any marketing, you want to be very specific with who you want to attract. That comes down to their industry, their size of company, how many employees they have, where they're located. And that's more of a B2B scenario, but on a consumer side, the same kind of things come into play, whether it's, their income, where they're located in the country, et cetera. That's the first step. The second step is and this has kind of surprised me over the years running an agency as well, but a lot of people haven't even defined their products necessarily, especially service-based businesses. They tend to just be very, do whatever they can to bring money in. Whereas the best companies, they usually what they call productize their services. They list exactly what they're doing and they have a set price for it. And then likewise, if you have a service-based, product-based business, it's great to add an element of service to it. So they kind of work diametrically in a way. So that's step number 2 is your offerings, which are your products and services. Step number 3, which is another area that is usually lacking, but be very specific with your value. Like, what is the value proposition you have? So what's the transformation someone's going to have as a result of working with you? And so those are kind of the internal factors. Those are the 3 internal factors. And then I have 3 factors that are kind of external, which looks at how do you grow the number of buyers? How do you get them to come back again and again? So being loyal. And then how do you also increase their average value over time? So those are the 6 factors.
Do you find that smaller businesses have difficulties in breaking down some of these things? Because the way when I'm listening to you speak about the external factors of growing buyers, so obviously acquisition, right? Then we're talking about loyalty and return business. So we're looking for that repeat custom, right? And then finally, we're talking about increasing the average spend. So we're looking at lifetime value per customer. Do you find that small businesses have kind of missed a lot of these factors as very important? For me, they're key performance indicators for a business, right? When we start working with a client, we want to understand what the lifetime value of a customer is on average. We want to understand what the sales cycle looks like in terms of a time delay between finding a lead, signing the lead. We want to understand what the average cost per acquisition is. But we also want to understand that lifetime value to be able to make sure that we understand, the full cycle that happens in there. But do you find that small businesses miss or have spend less time looking at these things to really help understand how that can help move the needle?
Yes, absolutely. Over the past 20 years of working with all size businesses, but a lot of small businesses in particular, they almost inevitably focus on acquisition. So they put almost all their money into getting new leads or new sales with very little thought into how to maximize the value of those buyers and then how to keep them loyal to come back and buy again. Or the other area they're missing is referrals. So how to get referrals from those same customers or patients or buyers, And so that's definitely one of the big differences between the small companies and the bigger companies. The big companies put a lot of thought into how to do that, which is one of the reasons why they're so successful.
I'm going to circle all the way back in my true fashion and probably take us down a bit of a rabbit hole, but bear with me if you can. You were talking earlier on, those key elements of understanding, the difference between revenue, profit, the cash flow. And you mentioned as well about, most companies don't have a huge runway, right? Most companies aren't sat on a ton of cash. In fact, unless we talk about Apple, most companies don't work on the basis of having a ton of cash in the bank. But actually during this, so we're recording this beginning of June. We've been going through the last sort of 3 months of lockdowns across many countries, changes in complete industries, right? Disappearing almost overnight. But the thing that's really strange to see is how many of the big companies, and we talk about, airlines and people like that, are literally only ever 2 months away potentially from bankruptcy. And actually, it's something that we only kind of think about as being an issue for small businesses most of the time. But in reality, it's a lot of businesses, right, that don't have that cash flow to be able to support months on end with zero growth or with zero revenue, or even, a big reduction in revenue can actually have catastrophic impacts.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's one of the reasons why digital companies are valued so high. So one of the reasons why Apple's worth so much and Google and all these other digital companies is because they're not so asset dependent. So if you're running a huge manufacturing company, airlines, et cetera, you have all this money put into assets where, if something goes wrong, it's a lot more risky. And then the other part is not having diversification. So a lot of digital businesses have more diversification because, if one side of the revenue goes down, so for instance, iPhones, right? So Apple puts a lot of money into manufacturing iPhones, but they also have a lot of revenue coming in from, the Apple store and all these other areas. And so that's where their diversification helps them. And that's something even smaller businesses can learn from. So how are you diversified if something does go south? What other avenues can you leverage to bring in some revenue or incremental revenue? Like there's even yoga studios that are doing kind of virtual training. I mean, there's a lot of ways to. And I think this kind of question goes into pivoting. So how do you pivot in a situation like this? That's one of the things you want to look at. Like, is there a different product or service that we can supply that still fulfills the need of the buyer in a different way?
Yeah, and I think that's a huge life lesson for everyone, really. Being able to have that kind of agility and the mindset to be able to embrace change and start looking for alternatives or, like you said, additional revenue streams, diversifying, or even just pivot the whole business, right?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So we've talked about the book, but in these 3 parts, right? So we're talking about the strategy, then we're talking about planning and execution, and obviously the resources, right? And leveraging resources. Now, for most of the people listening, for their small to mid-sized businesses, the resources element is always an issue, right? And you talk there about squeezing every dollar and, getting that value and reducing the costs or whatever else. What are some of the strategies and the ways that you help businesses to really kind of maximize their resources, whether it be time, whether it be money, whether it be whatever's in the business that they're currently doing? Give us a bit of an idea and a feel for that if you can.
Absolutely. So what I break down the resources is into three buckets: your time, your effort, and the money. And those can be kind of measured against the stage in your business. And so I look at three conditions that a business could be in. Number one, they could be stagnant. So they're just not moving anywhere. Number two, they might be in scale mode and they want to grow rapidly. Or number three, which unfortunately so many of us find us right now, which is you're in crisis mode. And so how you allocate your time and effort and money differs based on which of those scenarios you're in. So for instance, if you're looking to scale, you want to compress time. So you want to get things done in a faster way. So that means a lot of times you'll spend more money and increase your effort. Whereas if you're in survival mode, maybe you're a startup or you're facing this pandemic, you want to do the inverse. You want to stretch time out. So you want to delay your payments. You want to get money as soon as possible. So those are kind of cash flow issues. And you might want to reconsider the timeline it'll take. So it's going to take longer to grow to the level you want to have. And so you always want to be looking at your resources of time, effort, and money in the lens of what do you want to accomplish. Are you trying to survive or you're a startup? Do you want to scale or do you want to break out of a stagnant path? And so how you allocate those differs based on those scenarios.
And when it comes to limited resources, what are the key things that small businesses can do to try and help them get out of either crisis mode or, even stagnation, which we can often find ourselves guilty of quite a lot, which is, things are going okay, things are ticking smoothly. It's less complicated to stay there than it is to potentially try and take things to the next level. So what are some of the strategies and the ways that people can really get that shift to start happening?
Sure. So I'll look at a couple of them. Let's look at money. So the first thing you want to do is really it's all about prioritization. What are you prioritizing? So in the case of money, you want to and you're trying to save money right now because of the circumstances of your business. You want to first prioritize your costs. So making sure your costs are in line so you're achieving your profitability goals. You want to make sure that you are getting paid on time from your clients. A lot of times people let it slide and people might be paying 60 days late. You want to make sure that's a priority in terms of getting cash in the bank. And then you want to prioritize your higher margin markets. The people that are going to buy, focus on the ones that are going to get the most value and therefore pay you the most. And also the ones that are your products and services that are going to convert at the fastest rate. So those are just a couple ideas on how you can prioritize your money. In terms of effort, what you want to do is kind of evaluate where you spend your time. Is there someone else that could be doing it? I mean, this is where it makes sense a lot of times to hire an agency because you don't want to necessarily learn all the fundamentals of Facebook advertising if your job is to run the company. You might want to do bartering. Bartering is another great thing you can use to maximize your effort because you can get things at a lower cost. And then finally, the last one is time. Like in terms of time, you want to adjust, you want to lengthen, you mentioned the term runway, but that's basically how long your business can stay in business without any new cash coming in, with your current amount of money you have. So you want to obviously figure out how to extend that runway as long as possible and how to make sure you have a replenishment of the funds that you have in the bank. And so one of the things I advise all companies to do is to come up with a recurring revenue model. That way you have money particularly coming in every single month and not having to hunt down new sales every single day. So those are just a couple tips that come to mind.
It's quite interesting though, right? Because often when we go into the crisis mode or stagnation mode or anything like that, one of the first ideas is quick, cut everything that's deemed non-essential. And again, I think this is probably where it comes back to the first two steps, right? Where your strategy and your execution come in, which is, cutting out your marketing agency because things are starting to get tight or you're not sure where revenue will come from next week or next month or whatever. it also becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Because obviously once you cut that marketing, and if it has been used by agencies or outsourced by freelancers, whatever it might be, all those efforts that you have been putting in and that hopefully have been generating results can actually literally disappear overnight. And the part that you mentioned there, when you are looking for new business, so let's say it's a one and done kind of business model, so there isn't that ability to have recurring revenue. It's almost the heightened moment when you need marketing the most, which is when it gets competitive and hard out there, right? When you're struggling. So what sort of advice do you have for people when they're in that kind of, I need to cut costs, but also, you need to make sure the business survives and that you keep generating revenue?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what I always try to do is always think about having one foot in the present and one foot in the future. And so you want to look at, okay, where am I actually getting sales from, and what's a realistic time frame for getting those dollars in? And so, the first thing you want to look at is how many leads or sales has your agency been generated, and then making a justification on whether they make sense or not. And you want to look at also the time frame. So if typically your sales process, it takes 6 months to close a deal, it's not a wise move to cut an agency off after 4 months, because you've not only wasted the 4 months, but you never would have got the return back. And so you want to look at everything on a very analytical way. So a lot of times, when we're in a difficult situation, we tend to make emotional decisions, but you really want to take a very analytical approach and look at the dollars and cents of what's going out, and then measure what's coming in as a result of that. And this kind of points out another area that a lot of businesses don't have. They don't tend to plan, and they don't have a strategy, but sometimes worse than that even is they don't have a way to measure. And so you want to make sure you have the right measurement systems to keep accountability for yourself and for the people that work with you and for you.
I had this conversation with, I think it was Jason Yormack on this, on the podcast. And I basically was saying, most agencies could get rid of their monthly reporting and pretty much just have, this is how much you spent, and this is how much directly was generated from that spend. And that would help businesses 10x than compare, or even 100x compared to, those complicated 30-page reports that have everything from page views to brand sentiment and all these kind of fancy things that come on all the reporting tools nowadays, and kind of detract away from the fundamentals, which is, does this make your business any money? Right? That's what the number one goal of marketing is.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's also important to look at the lead indicators. So a lot of times there's lead indicators that drive the lag indicators. So the other problem that businesses run into is they do look at the lag indicators, like how much money did I make, without thinking about the lead indicators. So for instance, again, if you have a long sales cycle, you might want to be looking at how many leads you're getting, and then what's your close rate of your salespeople. So the other trap that business owners fall into is they just look at the end metric without taking consideration where other road bumps might be in the path. And so that way you can hold not just your agency accountable, but people internally, because if the salespeople aren't closing deals, that's not something you want to hold the agency accountable for, especially if they're doing a great job. That ends up hurting you in the end. So it's really getting an idea of what the end result is, but what also leads to the end result. And like you said, just keeping it simple. You don't need a 20-page dashboard. You just need to know the 4 or 5 key metrics that drive the end result that you're looking for.
It's always interesting, actually, because we come back down to the same thing, right? Understanding, a bit like what you were talking about earlier when you said, university, great, you've got the educational part, and then actually, the boots on the ground, the experience of running a business. But ideally, you're just trying to understand what those key metrics are. And part of that kind of strategy session or strategy part, for me anyway, when we're planning out things, we're really trying to get people to start digging into those things, because I find that a lot of people just simply haven't looked at it, right? They don't know if customers repeat buy. They don't necessarily know if what the lifetime value might be in terms of actual physical money once somebody is signed up. All of these things have such a big impact on your decision-making process as a business owner or as a marketer. It's just huge, right? It's an epic kind of proportional response to what you actually know. And that amount of information, sometimes it is as simple, like you said, 4 or 5 different key indicators that actually give you a real sense of how the business is functioning and how the marketing section is functioning in particular.
Yeah, it's important to keep a track on all those. And the other thing I find with a lot of businesses, they just say, "I'm sorry, we don't have that data," and that's not really a great answer. What I always say is, look, if you don't have the data, that's fine, but don't have that same excuse 6 months, a year from now. Like, start now. Get an idea of where that data is and how you can collect it. And the other thing too is understanding where it comes from, because you can get the sales numbers from a variety of places. You can get it from your analytics platform like Google Analytics. You can get it from your marketing automation. You can get it directly from your salespeople, or you can get it from the bank. Like, just have one place where you can track it. That way, accountability is much easier, because otherwise there's confusion or other people are responsible for it. Just have one source and one person that's responsible for that particular metric.
Do you find as well, I'm going off on a tangent again, but do you find that people end up focused too much on these really super fancy reporting tools, and they go through all these dashboards and the screens and all this absolute nonsense, to be honest with you, when you don't necessarily know the basics and the fundamentals? But do you find that people are kind of always, I think I used the expression once of, they're distracted by the shiny new thing. So when this new tool comes out and it does all sorts of analytics, they end up spending hours and effort and money on these things that give them all sorts of great insight if you knew the basics and that maybe you could build on, but really don't actually focus on where the issues could be lying, or where those deadly silent killers, right? That things like, for example, mistaking your revenue for your profits and all of those kind of lead costs and acquisition costs, etc.
Yes, there's a few problems. Number one, vanity and ego. So people love to see how many followers do I have, how many likes do I have, etc. The other problem is kind of looking at, not knowing the right things to measure, like we just went over. But then people also they get distracted. They look at too many things, and so even if there are great metrics, you really want to narrow it down to just a few, because your mind can't handle too many things, because it's not actionable. You want to mostly look at things that you can, or not mostly, you should always look at the things you can actually impact and change. And the best way I judge it is to look at the end. What's the end goal, and work backwards. So don't look at the metrics and try to figure out what your end result's going to be. Look at your end result and work it backwards to find out what you should be measuring. That's the easiest way to approach it.
So how have you found small businesses react, or how do you find they engage with a strategy or the ideas from such big brands, right? Because the model that you've built out is really based on these big, successful Fortune 500 companies. But actually, when you're then talking to, I don't want to say mum and pops, but the small businesses, the small to mid-sized businesses, how do you find that they kind of interact? Is there resistance? Is there, onboarding kind of excitement? What's the kind of feeling that you get from them?
Yes, a lot of times they can be have some trepidation about moving forward, and which is why I learned and adapted my model. So what I did with the model was I looked at the best companies in the world, but then I translated those into individual models for different verticals. So the way the results loop works is it's built on modeling the best companies, but it's also built to model your competitors. So for instance, you can put your competitors for results through the results loop, seeing what offers they have and how they're functioning. And that gives you a great idea. You can look at kind of the market leaders in different industries in your industry. So the key to building a strategy at the small business level is not to create from scratch. What I found is the best way is to create it where you're modeling success in a competitor, or success in a market leader outside your market, or sometimes the best innovation is from outside your market. So for instance, in automotive, they're really good at what's called show ratio. So getting a high percentage of people to show up to the showroom to look at the car. Some other industries are not so great about that. So maybe you're a dentist or you're a chiropractor and you're struggling with the show rate. So someone will go on the call, say, great, book my appointment, and then they never show up. So a lot of times you can benchmark across industries and create and add that to your strategy within the results loop. So that's the way I designed, is to get over that challenge, because I understand creating a strategy is overwhelming. So my goal was to create it to be very easy, simple, and easy to execute by leveraging modeling.
That's the important part, right? Because when you've worked in an agency, just like you have, strategies become big documents. They're a big deal. They take a lot of time, a lot of effort from a lot of people, input from the clients. And a lot of these things, we've written strategies in the past where if it hasn't been us that have gone on to implement or whatever else, then we've seen sort of certain parts just get left behind or whatever else. So the simplification of a strategy helps obviously with the implementation of it and the execution of it. How have you managed to simplify? And you mentioned the model kind of idea, so you can bring in these different parts. But how do you simplify something that is pretty complex into something that really, you can help any business, small or big, to really help them understand what it is they need to plan for?
Yes, great question. So I believe any strategy should be easy to communicate. And what that means is it should be simple enough where you can put it on a single piece of paper, or the way I built the system as well, is it could be whiteboarded. So usually when I do strategic planning, I start at a very high level on a whiteboard. And I think having it more, you don't want to get into too much granular details. So you don't want to get into exactly what the ad copy is going to say and things like that. A good strategy should be a little bit broader, and then it kind of drills down, almost like one of those Russian dolls where they fit inside of each other. So that's the way I built the results loop, is where you can communicate your strategy almost like a formula. And again, I touched on formula before, but it's very simple. What markets are you going to serve? What products and services are you going to give those markets? Your value proposition for those markets, and then how you're going to grow the business with the number of buyers, your loyalty, and then increasing lifetime value. That's at a high level for your company, and then you drill down into your key products and services. So for instance, if you know there's these 3 products that drive 80% of your revenue, focus on those, and then from there, create another one-sheet page that talks about the campaigns that are going to support them. So it really comes down to 3 pages. One for the company, a second one for your products and services, and a third one for the campaigns that are going to support those products and services.
I like the idea of taking that from the really high level view and then sort of making sure that runs downhill, right? That kind of keeps filtering into every single other aspect as things go into the implementation stages and whatever the channels might be. In terms of that as well, because you did mention, so we're not focusing on the ad copy and stuff like that when you're talking about strategy. But in terms of from your experience for small to mid-sized businesses, what have you seen being the real opportunity kind of platforms that people sometimes don't really realize? So it might be digital in terms of social media, it might be email, things like that. But what have you found have been some of the implementations that have been the most successful for small businesses?
Well, I think every small business should be focused on building their email lists. A lot of times people say email's dead. I don't believe that and haven't seen that to be the case. You want to make sure you own your list. So I think having your own assets, you want to obviously be leveraging social and ads, Google AdWords and all these platforms, but email is yours. So I think it's very important to leverage that. I think the other one I would be focusing on, especially with a limited budget, is retargeting. Because once someone's on your website, they're probably the most likely to buy, aside from someone that's giving you their email address. So leveraging what I call omnipresence, which is where you walk someone down the stages to convert someone, so you're building trust, you're building authority, you're showing them what you do, educating them, etc. You can sequence that through retargeting. So retargeting has gotten a lot more sophisticated over the years, where it's not just showing an ad for what they were looking at on the site, but literally taking them through that persuasion process through retargeting can be very, very powerful.
Tony, I absolutely have loved this conversation. When's your book coming out?
It's coming out in July, so we're about a month out. I'm making some tweaks to it and super excited to get out there. And what I've done actually is to get the best parts of the book out there now. And so I took about 40 pages out of the book and put it into a manifesto where anyone can read it free of charge. And I don't even have a form to gate it. It's literally out there in the open. So if anyone wants to take a look at that, it's at smallstepsmanifesto.com.
I will add that to the show notes, because I think that's going to be awesome for a lot of people. And I'm hoping as well, this is probably going to go out just around the time the book will be coming out. So I'm hoping that we'll have a link to the book as well for the full book. But listen, Tony, thank you so much for joining me today and for sharing your insights. I'm hoping that everyone will have taken away something very, very useful. Where's the best place for people to find you, Tony, and to connect with you?
So my website is Meet Tony G. So if you want to learn a little bit about me, just go to Meet Tony G. And then the website for the book is Small Steps to Grow Profits. That's the name of the book, and that's where you can find out about that book.
That's awesome. Thank you again, Tony.
All right. Thank you so much. It was a real pleasure. I had a great time today. Thanks.
The All About Digital Marketing podcast is brought to you by Social Inc., a distributed digital marketing agency specialized in delivering results through online campaigns. Whether it's content marketing, social media marketing, online advertising, or web design, we've got you covered, from strategy through to delivery. If you're struggling with your digital marketing, get in touch today by simply visiting www.socialinc.co.